Please welcome to the stage Verne Myers, Vice President, Inclusion Strategy, Netflix, and moderator Lori Castillo Martinez, Vice President, Employee Relations, Salesforce.
Well, I can say we are thrilled to have you here with us today to bring this conversation to the workplace.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Thanks. So let's start at the beginning. This is, I know, this beautiful crowd. Is it not amazing?
Yeah. You guys are beautiful.
Let's start at the beginning. This diversity and inclusion journey for you. Where did it start? How did it become such a passion for you?
Thank you, first of all, for just having me. It's a pleasure here to be here and see all you beautiful people. It's kind of interesting, but I think maybe this whole thing started when I was just about to turn 8 years old. It was a moment where I first saw my father cry. It was the night that King was assassinated in 1968. And he had been a hero, like, in school, he's a hero. Obviously, my dad was a hero, but to watch my dad, who was strong and never cried, reach that point, it made me realize something was very special that was happening and that it was very traumatic to my family. And I think it was really that night that I decided that I wanted to be an embodiment of King's dream and that I wanted to do right by his legacy. And that meant striving for peace and dignity and respect and justice. Those became words that came to life even as his life was taken. And it's sort of been that way from sometimes I had a brother and a sister, an older sister and a brother, and I would always be like, the family needs to meet. The children are not being treated with dignity, I mean, it was crazy. And
Started
my sister was just like, oh, here she goes, Don't talk to mom and dad. They're not going to listen to us. So, and it sort of started there. And then, I also realized that when King was killed, right, and I know so many people are young and just didn't have that experience, but like I'm from Baltimore City, and the place, we got Baltimore in the house. The place went crazy, like a lot of cities in the country. There was burning, there was fire, but like out of that rage and those ashes and a whole bunch of shame for the country, they started opening doors just a little bit, not enough to get us all through. Yeah. Right, but just a few little black kids, right? And I happened to be one of them. And there were like pools all of a sudden, and there were math enrichment programs, and then they opened up the school district, and you could travel. Before we were like contained in our neighborhoods, and you know what that means if you understand systemic issues around racism and how it impacts education and opportunity. And so I got to go across to a different middle school that got me to a high school, that got me to a college, and then a law school, and on. And all the time I am looking at sort of what's not right. Yeah. I often say I love being a black person for lots of reasons. But one of them is that early on you realize that the emperor has no clothes on, right? You're just like, hey, something ain't right, And I often say like to my good white friends where they were like, I don't have anything against black people. I'm like, that's nice. But they can't see the system, right?
Right.
They can't see if like all the racists stayed home all night, like stayed home, slept. Racism would still be like alive and well all day long. You know what I'm saying? Because it's just automatic. It's just built in. And so I think that's the stretch for a lot of people who haven't been raised with that certain identity and experience, that they can't see it. But I could see it early on, and I really began after practicing law. That didn't fit. And then I got an opportunity to start saying, how do I bridge these disparities that I see? Because I was the first black person my law firm had ever had, and I was the only one. And I was like, what? How is that still possible? It was Boston. legal space. I'm not hating on the Boston people. I lived there for 30-some years, but there's a history.
Yeah, for sure. Well, many of us know you for your famous quote, diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about somebody that asked you to dance, so to speak, and how did that impact your career?
Yeah, I've been really focused a lot on allyship. So first of all, thank goodness for the brother that just came out and did the meditation. He was amazing.
Yeah.
He was amazing. And, so I feel like first thing is just the ancestors, right? So, they're with you all the time, whether you can see them or not. And I drew a lot of inspiration from that kind of like level of sacrifice, level of courage. My parents were amazing. So basically I always feel like, in the big life, there are so many people who gave me opportunity, who could see my strength and encourage me. But then when I think about like what moved my career, because I have had a successful consulting business on my own as a Black woman entrepreneur for 22 years, right? And that, right? Which, when I think about it, it means that I'm old. But when I think about it, the number of people who paid in to make that possible, I'll give you an example. Unlikely mentor who really, I think, asked me to dance because he was a white guy, like maybe 20 years older than I was. He was from the Midwest, Chicago, Jewish, Chicago, okay. Balding, older Jewish man. In fact, he called himself that, bald old white man, bald man, yeah, Baum or something like that. And so he said to me, he was a consultant, and he was working in the law firm space that I was working in. He was talking to more about financial things because he'd been a partner in a law firm. He wasn't any longer, and he kept hearing my name. So he kept saying, so then he reached out to me, he said, I keep hearing your name. People have a lot of great things to say about you. Why don't we get together? When we got together, he said, what do you want to do? How are you thinking about things? And I said, well, I really like to do a conference. He's like, well, I've been doing conferences for 25 years. I'd be happy to help you figure out how to do it. I said, really? He said, yeah, let's do it together for a few years and then you can do it. We had like a really successful conference space for like 5 years, and then off he went, and I went on for 5 or 6 more years to do that conference. But he also said, come to Chicago, sit with me for 24 hours, and I will tell you how to make more money than you're making right now.
Wow.
Right? And I was like, what's up? You know how black people are. You know how black people are like, what is this? I don't know about that. But I want to say that. I really want to say that because I see people inviting people sometimes on the dance floor, and they're like, what's up?
Yeah.
Right? Or they get out and they don't do their best dance because they're so suspicious and there's a lot of cynicism and there's a lot of mistrust. And I get it and I know where it comes from. But you have to really look for those people who are saying they want to make a difference and make it easy and not hard for them to help you make a difference. And he was not lying. Within a year, I had increased my revenues by like 50%. It was crazy. Just by doing things that he had learned to do and that he was just passing it on.
Wow. That's amazing. Well, in the spirit of sharing, you have shared with all of us this fabulous book.
Thank you.
We're all very excited about it. What if I say the wrong thing? Many of us. 25 Habits for Culturally Effective People. Lots of stories, lots of great tips. What's one habit that you want to share with us?
Well, can I see? So you see this
Sure.
book right here? So my first book was so long. It was like this big. It was this long. My editor was like, do you want people to just buy it or do you want them to read it? I was like, I want them to read it. He's like, so you're going to have to cut it down. I like had a whole section on whiteness. He was like, okay, so right now the whole book is off kilter because this one chapter about whiteness has got 80 pages to it. So he's like, okay. So this second book, I was like, okay, I got to make this thing readable on a plane. Basically, you need to get on a plane, like on the East Coast, and go to the West Coast or vice versa and be schooled, okay? So, and I made it really like, okay, this is accessible. It's tip-based. I know people like their tips. So
Fits in your purse.
but the thing I tried to do is I tried to basically people were asking me this question all the time. And what I noticed is that there was a paralysis around engagement and bridging the divide, because folks were constantly afraid they were going to say the wrong thing. So I was like, okay, I got to take these excuses away from folks, right? I want to tell them an example of something that got said incorrectly. I want them to know why it's incorrect, right? Because a lot of us either hear things being said to us that we're like, that's not good. Or we say something and all of a sudden the whole room freezes, or people start looking at their shoes and you're like, oh man. So I was like, but you don't know why. You don't know why it's wrong. It just hits you wrong, or it has a bad impact, but you don't know why it's wrong. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna explain what's wrong, and then I'm gonna explain how to get out of it. Right, that's the idea, or how not to get in it. Anyway, so, I mean, one of the things, I think it's tip 2, where I'm like, I hope she can drive. And a lot of people like that because it's the story of me being on a plane and hearing a female pilot's voice come over the PA system and being all excited. I'm like, oh, women are in the stratosphere, the cockpit. We're so awesome. We're moving up. It's all good. Women's rights. And then it started getting bumpy. And I was like, I hope she can drive. Right? And that was like my indication that I was a biased person. Because I realized when I was coming back on that ride, the next leg, it was a male pilot. It's always a male pilot. It is often bumpy, and I never question the competence of the pilot.
Yeah.
And I'm like, look at that Miss Diversity lady, you know? Right? And I was like, good grief. Yeah. If I study this and do this work all the time, and that thought came to my mind, and I didn't realize in the moment that it was a problem, I had to actually see the difference in that leg back. And then I started really going, oh my God, this is what they're talking about, automatic associations, right? That, you know, even though I'm a good person, I got a brain that's sorting very quickly through a lot of data, and it's going to be doing it even more so when it's feeling like there's a high risk, right? And so, like, what happens is my brain says, like, big tube in the sky, you want a guy. That's what the brain has been taught over and over again. And you know, hey, I know some guys who can't drive. I know some women who are excellent drivers. So even having that information wasn't enough to keep me out of that automatic association. And I feel like that's what happens in the workplace a lot. I feel like that happens in our relationships, no matter where we are, in our communities, in our society, is that we're not aware of how our brain is making up stories about people before we even know who they are. And either that's a good story, or that's a story that you don't want anything to do with.
Yeah. Well, let's flip this on its head. You mentioned a minute ago, what if you're on that other side of that awkward comment or that awkward conversation? What tips do you have for those of us in the room who've maybe been in that seat?
Yeah, right? And it actually just goes back also to what he said about microaggressions and micro-inequities, right? So I know that our first response is no, she didn't. Like that's, or are you kidding me, or whatever. But what I have learned to do is to decide that I'm not going to take on the whole thing by myself. I feel like we should share the pain, right? And so what I am really trying to do is to give people a notion of impact. Because what happens is that people are like, but I'm a good person, and I didn't mean that, and you took it wrong, and you're too sensitive, and all of that, right? So that's why a lot of us don't speak up when there's a problem. But as a result, we take it all in. It hurts our feelings. We've got the trauma. It's stimulating us. And so I have learned to say things like, excuse me, but what do you mean? Just what do you mean? Because I could be wrong. I could have jumped to a conclusion. You might be able to clean it up. You know how they say clean it up, right? I want to give you the chance to clean it up. Or I might say, wow, man, seriously, when someone really says something that slaps me up across my face, I'm like, wow, that hurt. Or I'll just say, ouch. So I'm trying to get my whole company to get like the ouch thing going, right?
Yeah.
Because ouch is like this nice piece of feedback that's not like, I hate you, you should disappear. It's not like, it's more like ouch. It's like, or sometimes, I got this from my son. He's like, awkward? Like, I feel like that's just awkward, right? So, I mean, so part of it is if you're a comic person, you can kind of throw that in there, or you can say, can we start over? Or you can say things like, I've had a really different experience. This is especially important for an ally. Like, maybe you're not taking the full brunt, but you can see that it is a problem, that you could say something like, well, my experience is really really quite different, right? Or I wonder how people would feel if they understood this or that. Or are you aware that? So you add extra info. So it really is depending on what day it is, right? Because some days we just are not up for it. So I'm not saying that in every case you need to say something, but I feel like we need to say more things in more cases than we do, because we're always trying to fit in, get in, stay in. But we don't understand that when we don't stand up, it actually makes it harder for us to ultimately stay, right? Or to stay in the full capacity that we could deliver. And so we start to retreat. We start to look like we got an attitude all the time. We're not attractive sometimes because it's weighing on us, you know? And so and you don't have to do it in a moment. So some people are really good. I've learned to do it in the moment. You know, like if I'm in a taxi or something, and the driver starts going on about some people, right? I mean, I time it, but when I'm, when I'm getting out, I'm like, I don't think we use that language anymore. Thank you. Right? I mean, you don't have. Sometimes you're just gonna have to do it that way.
Yeah.
Or I'll say something like, well, not everybody is married to a person of an opposite gender. Because they'll just have like that heteronormative kind of language that they're using. And I'm like, actually. So I think you can do it in the moment, but if you can't do it in the moment, you can come back. Yeah. You can say, that conversation we had, it's just one thing that was just kind of stuck with me. And so I thought I should just share it with you. Now at Netflix, we're big on feedback. So we're like, I need to give you some feedback. But it's kind of nice setup because, feedback could be about anything, but this is another way that you could say to someone, like, when you use that term, I'm not sure that you know that actually the better term is this because that blah, blah, blah. And so a lot of times people appreciate that. Nobody wants to keep stepping in it.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Well, speaking of those who help us out when we're in the workplace, allyship. We just saw this fabulous video right before we came on.
I love it.
And at Salesforce, it's something we've been talking a lot about.
Yeah.
Tell us about your experience at Netflix. How are you talking about allyship? Why is it important to your business and the journey that you're on?
So, I got there this time last year, right? So my first business was to get us all on the same foundational sort of conceptual understanding about, inclusion, about diversity, about cultural competence, about unconscious bias, about privilege, and allyship is the next step on that understanding what this work is about. And and the reason why we got to allyship ultimately, right, is it because as you get all this information, what are you going to do with it? So allyship goes from concept to action. It's really a call to action. And we're actually starting to launch this whole thing around the whole world, and it means different things in different places to different groups. But mostly what it means is that you are going to stand up and be part of correcting the inequity and the disparity in whatever environment, whatever team, whatever country, whatever society, right? And I think the solidarity idea is something that has to be driven home, and also that allies are in partnership. And you really can't just call yourself an ally. You actually have to do something. Like people, we're never giving out the "I'm an ally" T-shirt yet, right? Because we're like, nah, folks are be trying to get the T-shirt, but not doing the work. So,
got to earn that T-shirt,
right? And I think the biggest misconception that we are trying our best to make sure people don't labor under is that somehow they're like the people who are helpless, and then they're the people who have all the power, and they're gonna help these people, right? Because they're good people and they're nice. And that's not what allyship is about. Allyship is deeply, you understand that unless this person is good, nobody's good. That you stand to benefit as much as anyone, that you're stepping in to support, because we cannot continue in a world where people are not respected, aren't given dignity based on something that should not be of any relevance whatsoever, their identity, their background, how they identify, right? So one of the things we're saying to allies is you must be led. You don't lead the other person has to lead you. You have to be in partnership. It's a lot of listening. It's a lot of learning before you can even step, really. And so that is really the work. It is not, you're not doing philanthropy. It's not about sympathy. It's about realizing that you want a certain type of world, that you have also been injured by sexism and racism and all of that, all of us bear the brunt of those oppressive systems in different ways, and so we all have to be part of changing it. And it's everything from our larger society to how people interact with each other in the workplace, in a team, with their outside partners, their clients, their customers. It's all part of the same thing.
Yeah. Well,
thank you.
Well, many of us, to the tune of 2 million of us, are fans of your TED Talk.
Thank you.
Where you're talking about this chipping away at biases. And you say in your TED Talk, you have to walk toward the discomfort. Mm-hmm. Tell us about that. What does it look like to consciously walk towards that discomfort?
It's so funny because after that TED Talk, I mean, people will be coming up to me in the street and they're like, okay, so I went to the grocery store.
Oh, no.
There's a guy there. I've seen him for 20 years. I've never spoken to him because I didn't know what to say, whatever. And I spoke to him. I'm like, how did it go? It's okay. It's okay, right? I mean, the things that people are scared to do kind of blows my mind. I'm like, all right. But all of us, quite frankly, have some level of discomfort.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm taking my boyfriend to the HRC dinner in DC, the Human Rights Campaign dinner in DC. Netflix is going to be there. I'm taking him. He's super straight. He's super black man straight. From the South. And I'm like, you ready? And he's like, yes. But when you think about it, it doesn't matter, like whatever your up identity is, like whatever your identity is where you're in the majority and you have been used to the norms being around your identity, whatever that is, there's usually gonna be some discomfort as you try to get comfortable.
Yeah.
But people don't realize that. They somehow think you can get comfortable without being uncomfortable. You can't.
Yeah.
You gotta first be uncomfortable and do it enough until ultimately you know it's okay to wear jeans to the black church. Because sometimes we're wearing jeans to the black church now, and the black folks in church are gonna be nice to you no matter what. You know, no, seriously, because I had some white friends, they're like, oh my God, why didn't you tell me we went to church? We had on jeans, everyone's dressed, we felt terrible, we were disrespectful. I was like, it's not that bad. It's not that bad. I'm sure people talked about you, but it's really no. No. But, I mean, mostly I think we fear the unknown, and the more we fear it, the more we fear it. You see, like, the more we don't make the connections, the more we don't gain the proximity, as they say, then we get to make up stuff about how scary folks are, how ignorant they are, how whatever, violent they are, whatever the stories are, we make up. And so my call to action for people is to, for example, if I asked you to, you can only choose 10 people to come to a very important dinner at your house. And you can't, it's not your 10 most important people, including your family. Like, okay, we already stipulate that maybe your family is part of your closest crew, but like non-family members, who would be at your table? How old would they be? What would be their gender identity? What would be their sexual orientation? What languages would they speak? You know, what does your own circle look like? Because if you do that analysis, some of us have a super, super diverse group of people we hang with, but many of us have a circle that reflects who we are. And that means on some level we are avoiding discomfort. Now, some people are like, look, I go to work every day and I'm outnumbered, and yeah, hell right, you're right. I'm going to surround myself when I'm not at work with my peeps. I get it. And there are also some limitations to that, right? Especially as you think about where you're in the majority and where you might need to expand beyond your comfort zone. So I'm really saying, you know, don't get crazy awkward, you know, build relationships around some common goal or theme. If you're at work, you're working. Build a relationship with someone you're working with. And then little by little, that relationship starts to grow. You grow trust. And then you start to have more of that relationship grow into more personal things. And then you start to have various conversations. And then you are expanding your social and professional circles. And by doing so, you can stop saying things that get you in trouble. Because, you know, and if you have a friend, like I remember I have a friend, she's Jewish, and I had gone to Barnard College, and I had been with a lot of Jewish girls, many of whom were my friends, some who were not, but this was like one of my besties in Boston, a grown-up, and I was describing a situation from college, and I said to my friend, I said, well, you know, she was a typical, and I used a name that I had heard over and over again at school, 3 letters, beginning with a J. And my girlfriend was like, what? And I was like, you know, and she was like, what? And I was like, you know, she's like, you can't say that. And I was like, what do you mean I can't say that? Because, and then I did the typical thing we hate. But I have a lot, you know, but you're my friend, we're a Jewish friend. and you know, I love the Jewish people. And I started doing all that stupid stuff that we hate when people are like, you know, I got one Latina friend, you know, so, and I was at her house, or I've been to an Indian wedding. You're like, so? You know, right? I was doing all that, and she looked at me, and she was like, you can't say it. And I was like, oh, shoot. I had no idea, right? But in a friendship, A, your friend can tell you where you're wrong, and B, you can apologize, and 3, they will still be your friend. So I say build relationships, create friendships, learn things from that, and you can make mistakes in relationships and recover from them. But when you do this to everybody and you keep them at arm's length, it's really hard to build that kind of rapport and trust where you can learn and grow.
Yeah. Well, I'd be remiss if I let you off the stage without asking you, what's your favorite thing on Netflix now?
Oh my
What are you watching? What's the list?
Oh my gosh, to have a job where you watch TV a lot, it's crazy. I mean, I'm loving everything. Okay, so Well, first of all, When They See Us was epic. Epic. And that is the power of Netflix, that people in 190 countries know what happened in that situation and understand more about the difficulties in our criminal justice system. But also, you know, there's a lot of fun on service as well. I loved Always Be My Maybe.
Oh, that was a good one.
I loved that. It was so awesome. And then I have guilty pleasures, but I'm not going to share them. But yeah, I'm kind of always on service now. And also, our service works so great. And others, I go to other services, I'm like, I just went from the bedroom to the living room. Why don't you know exactly where I just stopped this show, you know? So, but anyway, it's a lot of great stuff. And I feel like our work is to continue to tell as many diverse stories as there are, and there are many, and we haven't even scratched the surface, and we're finding them all over the world, and people in China, people in India are able to see what stuff is happening in Brazil and Africa and all sorts of countries in Europe. It's just so powerful, the possibilities here, and that's what time it is, and I think it is a beautiful time to be a person who used to be like no one wanted to hear your voice. Now everybody knows our voice is everything. So
yeah, that's amazing.
Thank you. Thank you so much.